Okay. So you're thinking about starting a new crime saga. Huh. Well, what if you could get like a sneak peek at the author? Someone known for their crazy plots and like that gritty realness before you even open the book.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to dive deep into the world of Don Winslow.
Don Winslow.
Recently retired, but a giant in crime fiction.
Oh, yeah.
And his work, still captivating readers. Born on Halloween 1953, this American writer, he's left behind a powerful legacy.
And it's a fascinating legacy to explore, especially for, anyone out there thinking about picking up one of his books. For this deep dive, we checked out the Wikipedia entries for Winslow himself and his acclaimed novel, The Power of the Dog.
The Power of the Dog.
Now a Goodreads page. Still MIA.
Ah.
But our goal here is pretty straightforward. Give you a solid understanding of Winslow's background, the core themes that drive his narratives, and how his work has been received, critics and readers alike. By the end, you should have a much better sense of whether Don Winslow's brand of crime fiction is right for you. All right, so let's start with the basics. Winslow wasn't just born, with a pen in his hand. He's got a background that seems to have really influenced his storytelling. Born on Staten Island, but spent his childhood in Perryville, Rhode Island.
Huh.
It's a coastal town. I can practically picture it as the setting for one of his, more atmospheric stories.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds like storytelling was a family affair. His mother, a librarian. Talk about being surrounded by stories.
Right.
His father was a Navy officer, but also a natural storyteller himself, often entertaining friends with his yarns.
Wow.
That sounds like a pretty good environment for a future novelist.
Absolutely. I mean, that early immersion in both the structured world of literature and then, the more informal tradition of oral storytelling, that's a potent mix. And what's really interesting is how that foundation led him through some pretty diverse real-world experiences before he ever became a full-time author. I mean, he got degrees in African history and military history. Doesn't that just suggest a real intellectual curiosity? Like a commitment to understanding these big, complex systems. And, that definitely comes through in his intricate plots.
Totally. And his early career, it reads like a synopsis for one of his own thrillers.
Yeah.
Analyst for the State Department in South Africa in the 80s. A safari guide in Kenya.
Oh, wow.
I mean, can you imagine the stories he must witness there? And then a private investigator back in the U.S.
Wow.
It's almost like he was actively gathering material firsthand, for his future books. All that experience in like the underbelly of society, that probably gave him a really raw view of human motivations.
Yeah.
And the failures of the justice system. You see that a lot, recurring element in his cartel trilogy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, those aren't just academic observations, right? They're lived experiences. That lends a real weight and authenticity to his fiction. And the shift to writing full-time, it came after a pretty big milestone, the film and publishing deal for The Death and Life of Bobby Z, notably a Barry Award finalist. That success allowed him to really dedicate himself to, the demanding work of crafting these stories.
So this is where it gets really interesting. After that,
Yeah.
he settles in California. And it becomes like this iconic backdrop for so much of his work. You could almost feel the sun and the shadows of that landscape in his writing camp.
Yeah.
He even goes into television, co-creates Youth Undercover. But what's really relevant for us, as you know, potential readers, is his more recent decision to retire from writing.
Yeah.
April 2022, to focus on political video making and activism.
Oh, wow.
And those final City on Fire sequels. Those are his last novels.
Nice.
He even started a book club on Twitter in 2023. So he's still connected to the literary world, just in a different way now. What do you think? How does knowing all this about his recent focus, how does that shape how you might approach his earlier work?
That's a really good question. This move to political activism by, a writer at the peak of his career, I mean, that really suggests a deep and ongoing engagement with, the real world issues that often form the backbone of his fictional narratives. It makes you wonder if his fiction was, in a way, a precursor to this, more direct form of engagement.
Right. Okay, so let's get into the books themselves. Okay. Primarily known for crime fiction, but he's also touched on mystery, even historical fiction. To give you an idea of his scope, there's the early Neil Carey series. That offered a different flavor, maybe leaning more towards, traditional suspense, with the younger protagonist navigating complex situations. And then you have the sprawling cartel trilogy, The Power of the Dog, The Cartel, and The Border. This is what really thrust him into the spotlight, tackling these massive contemporary issues head on.
Yeah.
We also have the surf-infused Boone Daniels series, the super intense Savages series, the Frank Decker series, intriguingly not published in English, and his recent Danny Ryan trilogy, starting with City on Fire. And don't forget the standalone novels like Savages again, The Force, and The Winter of Frankie Machine, plus his collection of novellas Broken, and even a nonfiction work, Looking for a Hero. It's a lot.
It's an extensive catalog for sure, and it really showcases his ability to explore different facets of the crime genre, you know? What's fascinating is how he keeps coming back to certain powerful themes, like this exploration of the corrupting nature of power, the often blurred lines of morality in the criminal underworld, and the just profound human cost of violence, particularly within the context of the drug trade. The Cartel trilogy, in particular, feels like this epic, unflinching examination of, the drug cartel phenomenon and its devastating consequences on both sides of the border. And it's worth noting his heavy involvement in film and television.
Right.
Not just with adaptations of his books, but as a co-creator and a writer. This points to, a very visual and often high-octane style of storytelling.
Yeah, totally. It's almost like you can see the scenes playing out in your mind as you're reading. And speaking of adaptations, it seems like Hollywood is still really into his work. More adaptations in the works for The Force, The Border, City on Fire, even his debut novel, A Cool Breeze on the Underground.
Oh.
I mean, that level of interest from the screen world, that definitely speaks to the compelling nature of his narratives and characters. Now, we should touch briefly on his pretty well-known political views and activism. He's been really outspoken on issues like gun control and drug legalization.
Yeah.
And his politically charged videos have gotten a lot of attention. It's important to acknowledge this part of his public life because it for sure informs some of the themes he grapples with in his fiction. However, as we always say, we're here to discuss his work, not to endorse any specific political stance.
Exactly. Understanding an author's engagement with the world around them, it can provide a richer context for their writing. However, it's really important for you, the listener, to approach the books with an open mind and engage with the stories and the characters on their own terms.
So how has all of this been received by the literary world? Let's get into the critical reception and the awards he's received. Even his very first novel, A Cool Breeze on the Underground, earned Edgar and Seamus Award nominations.
Wow.
That's a pretty amazing start for any author. And it really seems like The Power of the Dog was a turning point for him, garnering huge critical acclaim and becoming a finalist for a bunch of prestigious awards.
Yeah.
What do you think it was about this particular book that really resonated with critics? Was it the scope? The characters? That unflinching portrayal of the drug war?
Probably a combo of all those things. The Power of the Dog really showed off his ability to weave together this complex, multi-generational narrative with, deeply flawed but compelling characters, all set against this backdrop of a brutal, uncompromising reality. And what's really striking is the consistent recognition his work has received throughout his entire career. The Cartel trilogy, and the Cartel in particular, got exceptional praise. I mean, starred reviews from major publications, tons of Best Books of the Year selections, and winning the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award and the RBA Prize for Crime Writing, that's a major international award, really underscores the impact and quality of that series.
And the accolades just kept coming, right? The Force, which goes into the dark world of police corruption in New York City, was also celebrated as the best book of the year by a lot of publications. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the most significant awards has to be the Raymond Chandler Award he got in 2012.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at the list of previous recipients, literary giants, Stephen King, John le Carré, John Grisham, Elmore Leonard, it shows his mastery of the thriller and noir genres. It's like being recognized as a true, heir to some of the greatest storytellers in the field. This consistent critical acclaim and, the impressive list of awards, it suggests a writer who's not just telling, gripping stories, but doing so with exceptional skill and depth.
Totally. I mean, that Raymond Chandler Award, that is a huge indicator of his lasting contribution to the genre. And as you pointed out, those are just some of the highlights. His work has consistently earned nominations and wins across all sorts of awards, showing, a sustained level of quality and impact.
Okay, so let's think a bit about the person behind all these intense stories. What do we know about his writing style and process? Apparently, he's very disciplined, has a writing routine that starts early in the morning, often followed by a hike to clear his head. And here's a fun fact. He sometimes works on 2 books at the same time, switching between them when he gets stuck. He's even described writing as an addiction. Does knowing this kind of dedicated, almost obsessive approach, does that give you a different perspective on the intensity of his novels?
It really does. That level of discipline and immersion suggests, a deep commitment to his craft. What's also fascinating is how the time it takes him to finish a book varies. The Death and Life of Bobby Z was actually written during his daily train commute. That's, a testament to his ability to focus even in the most mundane circumstances. But then you have The Power of the Dog, which was a 6-year undertaking, involved a ton of research, including firsthand interviews in Mexico. This just shows his dedication to getting the details right, especially when dealing with, complex and sensitive topics.
So after all this information, the big question for you, our listener, is still out there. Should you dive into the world of Don Winslow? Based on his, compelling personal journey, the intense themes he explores in his crime fiction, and the widespread critical acclaim he's received, what do you think? If you're drawn to crime fiction that doesn't shy away from harsh realities, features complex characters facing tough choices, and often tackles important social issues, could Don Winslow be the author you've been searching for?
Exactly. Does a writer with such a diverse background and, a clear passion for the issues he explores, does that pique your interest? Are you drawn to stories that have connected with so many critics and readers? His books often take you to the dark corners of society and explore timely and often uncomfortable truths. If you like crime fiction with that kind of weight and substance, then Winslow is definitely an author you should check out. And given how many of his books are getting adapted for the screen, it's pretty clear his storytelling has that cinematic, fast-paced quality. Might appeal to you if you enjoy that reading experience.
At the end of the day, the choice is yours.
Of course.
But we hope this deep dive has given you the insights you need to make an informed decision about, whether to embark on a Don Winslow reading journey.
We hope so.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Don Winslow, from his early years to his impactful literary career and then his recent move into political activism, here's a final thought for you to think about. Given this transition from acclaimed author to politically active filmmaker, does understanding an author's life and passions outside of their fiction, does that actually enhance or complicate your experience of reading their books? What do you think about a writer who steps away from a super successful career to, tackle these important issues of our time in a completely different medium?
It's a fascinating question. We encourage you to explore Don Winslow's, very extensive bibliography further, armed with the knowledge we've shared today. Happy reading and maybe even happy viewing of his videos.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.